Okay, so this isn't quite Game of Thrones, but it's the closest thing that chess has got to it, because as Magnus Carlsen is now stepping back from being world champion, it begs the question, who is going to come to the fore in the coming decade or so of chess? And it's the young guns you really have to start looking to. Guys like the two players featured in today's video, Alireza Firouzja and Arjun Erigaisi, both still teenagers. Now this is the quarterfinals of the Airthings Masters, and yes, it's just a battle for this tournament, but it's also part of this larger war to see who can rise to the top of chess, maybe become world champion one day. So let's see what happened in this particular game, Alireza with white, and I'll reveal the overall match score at the end of the video. So here we see c4 on the board, not his favourite e4. Now we get c5. Both players develop both sets of knights, so copycatting each other, and after g3 preparing to fianchetto, now we see this pawn kicking on to d5. So Alireza captures, the knight takes back, bishop g2, pawn g6, and now a very unusual move from Alireza. The most common here is castles. There's also pawn to d3, but he was playing catch up in the match at this point, so he looks to mix it up. He goes knight to e4 here, a rare continuation. Now it hits this pawn, but it breaks opening principles, where they say don't move the same piece twice in the opening if you can avoid it. Now what does Arjun do? He kicks on with that pawn, and it looks a bit overextended after queen to c2, but this is his idea, pawn to b5, and the computer doesn't like this continuation. You'll see the eval bar go up there, because you're weakening this long diagonal, the bishop's already placed there, and after b3, which Alireza plays, we can see this pawn becoming really sensitive now. For example, you can't capture, or you simply drop a knight here with check. So instead, we see the bishop coming to the long diagonal, hits that rook, Alireza develops, blocks the attack, and now this knight hops in, it picks up a tempo on the queen, but this is kind of a pseudo initiative for black, because after the queen drops back, you're forced to actually chop these off. There's not much better of a move. The queen recaptures, hits this rook in the corner, black now castles, and actually it's white who's the one with the initiative here. You can see the significant lead in development, you can see the pressure on this pawn, and taking that pawn is already a good move, leaving black with that isolated weakened pawn. You can also start with castles, but Alireza now plays a bit ambitiously with pawn to a3, and what he's overlooked is that after bishop f5, not moving this knight, attacking this one, you can't play the move he plays because of a tactical issue. So what he should do here is capture this knight, let black take here, and then go for this position where things are roughly equal. But what we see in the game is not takes on b4, but instead knight to h4, hits this bishop, opens this one to defend here, and x-ray down the diagonal, plus this is still attacked, and if it moves, then this one's weak. Looks really good for white, but can you guess the move which Alireza has overlooked here? So the move that's played is queen to d4, and it's a huge problem, because if you capture that queen, which looks like the move you want to play, you know, your queen's attacked and undefended, well then black can land this check on c2. It's a royal fork, because after the king goes, you can actually take the queen with the other knight and therefore leave this one attacking the rook in the corner. And this is the big problem, that after you save that rook, now you drop a critical pawn that anchors that knight on c2, and it's just hopeless for black in that position. So because of these tactical problems with taking the queen, Alireza goes rook to b1, defending his queen, but now we see takes on e4, and you have to trade these queens, because if you take with the bishop here, winning your material back, well, black takes, hits the rook in the corner, and if you go, say, pawn f3 to stop that attack, well, then there's knight d3 check, forking queen and king. After the king moves, well, there's different good moves. You can even chop here, get a line like this, and black emerges a whole knight up. So big tactical problems. Alireza has to chop the queens off, and now again we see the check landed here. Saves the knight which was attacked, the king moves, the second knight takes, and after Alireza wins back his piece, yes, the material is restored, but only for a moment, because now black takes this pawn, hits the rook, and after it goes away, now pawn b4 anchors that knight. A fantastic move because it sacrifices an exchange in the corner here, which Alireza is basically forced to take. If he takes this one, for example, and ignores that exchange, well, black can now save it, d3 protects the pawn, and now a5 is an example of a great move, and you can see the problem, that although the material's level, black's got these two connected passed pawns, and the white forces are just a bit uncoordinated here. This isn't a good position. So instead, Alireza thinks, well, if I'm going to be worse, I may as well be worse with the extra material. But now black doesn't recapture the bishop. This is nice. Instead, you throw in this knight takes on b3. So you win the pawn and attack the rook in the corner. And again, the rook is obliged to save itself. Then you recapture. And although you're in exchange down as black, you can see the problem with these pawns here that are passed and menacing on the queen side, clamping on these white rooks' movement. So e3 was played, looking to give the king some room and then activate this rook. We see e5 from Arjun, and after king e2, we see his point, which is to further clamp on the position. So Alireza looks to break out. And now not f5, because then you'd be leaving yourself with a weakened pawn here. Not so bad, but why do that? Instead, we see captures with check. Yes, it helps the knight reactivate, but after pawn a5, rook f1 to hit the open file, now f6 shuts down that knight jumping, and there's really no good squares for it to go to. So it hops to the edge of the board, but with the idea of rerouting like this. Now it does open up the attack here. Arjun defends, the knight comes back, rook d6 further activates, and there's now pressure coming down on this backwards d2 pawn. Knight f4 played, and now another excellent move from Arjun, just turning the screw. He plays pawn to c3, and this move looks impossible because if white captures, which is what Alireza played, then you can't recapture because you lose your knight here. But recapturing with the pawn is not the idea. If we come back here, Arjun's idea is to hop the knight back, threaten this fork on c3, which would win the loose rook, and so there's no time for white to keep capturing pawns. And by the way, taking was the best move which Alireza played, because there was too much pressure here and also threats to keep pushing that black pawn. So the rook now moves, it comes away from the threat of the fork. Now we see the knight take with check anyway. The king goes, and now a4 kicks on the relentless march of the pawns. Knight e2 comes back, looks to exchange pieces, and this is nice calculation from Arjun. There are different winning moves here. You know, you can go knight e4 check as a top move, but instead he goes rook d2, and he's calculated his way through this, because although you let the rooks trade off the board, which usually you'd want to try and avoid when you've only got one rook, your opponent's got two, this endgame's actually hopeless. Now the rook is attacked and Alireza moves it, but what if he'd taken on c3? Yes, the rook drops, but now you win a second pawn and you're in this knight endgame. Well, actually, after black takes on h2, the whole thing's hopeless, because not only is black 2 pawns up, but with this one being an outside passed pawn, the king has to at some point come across to try and pick it up, or the knight will be tied down forever. And as soon as the king goes, well, this knight can start munching these pawns on the king side here, plus the king will activate. These kingside pawns then win out the day. So really hopeless endgame. So instead, the rook saves itself. We now see the knight check. King goes. Pawn b3 kicks on, and it's another brilliant finish to a brilliant game, because you're giving an entire piece. Alireza's got nothing better but to take that one. Knight recaptures, rook takes, and after pawn b2, you simply can't come and stop this pawn because both squares are covered. So we see a check, king goes, rook comes behind, but now a3 finishes the game. Here Alireza resigned, because if he brings his king, well, the pawn can advance, and although you can win this pawn, the second pawn promotes, and there's nothing white can do. So the final match score was 3-0. Alireza not at the races today, and Arjun progresses to the semi-finals. If you enjoyed this one and want to see another exceptional game from Magnus Carlsen, not Cagnus Marlsen today, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.